The Strait of Hormuz Crisis. Global Flashpoint, 2026. We are currently tracking what historians may one day call the most significant maritime escalation of the 21st century. As of 07:30 last night, the United States Navy has officially commenced a full-scale maritime blockade of Iranian ports. This follows the total collapse of the Islamabad Peace Talks over the weekend, a diplomatic failure that has pushed the Middle East and the global economy into uncharted waters. The Strait of Hormuz, a 21-mile-wide choke point that facilitates nearly 21% of the world's daily oil consumption, is effectively a war zone. For the past 6 weeks, we have seen a dizzying cycle of airstrikes, drone assassinations, and shadow war tactics transition into a full-blown conventional conflict. Tonight, we're breaking down the three-way collision between Washington, Jerusalem, and Tehran. We'll examine the military maneuvers, the economic fallout that has sent Brent Crude soaring past $120 a barrel, and the human cost currently being paid by seafarers trapped in the crossfire. The inciting incidents, how we got here. February 28, 2026. To understand the current blockade, we have to go back to February 28th. In a joint operation that caught the world by surprise, the United States and Israel launched a massive aerial campaign dubbed Operation Epic Fury. The primary objective was the systematic degradation of Iran's nuclear infrastructure and command and control centers. However, the escalation reached a point of no return when a targeted strike resulted in the death of Iran's supreme leader. The Iranian response was immediate and multidimensional. Tehran did not just launch missiles at Tel Aviv or US bases in Al-Assad, they turned their attention to the world's jugular vein, the Strait of Hormuz. On March the 4th, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, declared complete control over the strait. What followed was a systematic campaign of maritime denial. 1. Kinetic attacks, fast attack boats, anti-ship cruise missiles, and suicide one-way drones. 2. Sea mines, the deployment of bottom-dwelling and moored mines, turning the shipping lanes into a lethal lottery. 3. Electronic warfare, extensive GPS spoofing and GNSS jamming, making safe navigation nearly impossible for commercial tankers. The human and material cost, the tanker war of 2026. Since the start of hostilities, the Maritime Trade Operations Center has recorded 21 confirmed attacks on merchant vessels. We are no longer talking about harassment, we are talking about destruction. Vessels sunk, 1 tugboat, UAE flagged. Vessels damaged, 16 plus merchant ships, including the Skylight, MKD, VYEOM, and Primer. Fatalities, 12 seafarers confirmed dead or missing. Stranded ships, over 1,000 vessels are currently in a holding pattern, 800 inside the Persian Gulf, 200 outside in the Gulf of Oman. The case of the oil tanker Skylight on March the 1st serves as a grim template for this conflict. Struck by a projectile north of Qasab, Oman, the attack killed 2 Indian crew members instantly. What makes this incident complex is that the Skylight was already under US Treasury sanctions for its links to Iran's Ghost Fleet. In this war, even the ships helping Iran move oil aren't safe from the chaos of the front line. By mid-March, shipping traffic through the strait, which usually averages 130 transits per day, dropped by 70%. By late March, it hit 0. Major shipping giants like Maersk and MSC have suspended all operations in the region, citing unacceptable risks and prohibitive insurance premiums. The U.S. strategy, from assistance to blockade. The Trump administration's doctrine. The American response has shifted from defensive to aggressively offensive. On March 9th, President Trump initially claimed that Iran's naval capabilities had been neutralized and the strait was open. However, satellite imagery and the rising smoke from burning tankers quickly told a different story. By March 19th, the U.S. military shifted gears, launching a campaign specifically to force open the lanes. But the IRGC introduced a new, unconventional tactic, the illegal toll. In an unprecedented move, Iran began charging passage fees of over $1 million per ship for safe transit. Tehran framed this as a security tax necessitated by the war. President Trump's response was blunt. No one who pays an illegal toll will have safe passage on the high seas. With the failure of the Islamabad talks this past weekend, talks mediated by Pakistan that sought a 10-point peace plan, the U.S. has moved to its final economic lever, the selective naval blockade. The layers of the blockade. The U.S. Navy is not just patrolling. They have established a layered maritime interdiction architecture. The outer layer, P-8 Poseidon aircraft and high-altitude drones, creating a 24/7 recognized maritime picture. The interdiction layer, destroyers and littoral combat ships positioned to intercept any vessel bound for Iranian ports. The strike layer, carrier strike groups positioned to strike any Iranian land-based missile battery that illuminates a U.S. or neutral vessel. The Israeli position, the war on two fronts. While the U.S. focuses on the water, Israel's focus remains on the head of the snake. Israeli intelligence has been the primary driver behind the targeting of IRGC logistics hubs. For Israel, the closure of the strait is not just an economic issue, it is a strategic diversion. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, have maintained that as long as Iranian-backed proxies in Lebanon and Yemen continue to fire into Israeli territory, the maritime pressure on Tehran must remain absolute. We have seen reports of Israeli submarine activity in the Gulf of Oman, a rare and potent signal to Tehran that their backyard is no longer private. The global economic emergency, oil, LNG, and the grocery crisis, we are witnessing the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. Oil prices, Brent Crude has surged. Every week the strait remains closed. Analysts add a $15 risk premium per barrel. LNG shutdown. Qatar, the world's leading exporter of liquefied natural gas, has declared force majeure. On March 18th, an attack on the Ras Laffan industrial city reduced Qatar's LNG capacity by 17%. For Europe, still recovering from a harsh winter, the loss of Qatari gas is catastrophic. 1. The food crisis. This is the story not being told enough. The Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC states, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE rely on the strait for 80% of their caloric intake. We are seeing grocery supply emergencies in Dubai and Riyadh, with staple prices up 120%. The situation is evolving by the hour. The U.S. Navy is currently clearing mines while simultaneously turning back tankers headed for Iranian terminals. Iran has responded by mobilizing its Mosquito fleet of small, explosive-laden boats. We are at a tipping point. Does the U.S. blockade force Iran to the table, or does it trigger a total war that engulfs the entire Middle East? The new face of maritime warfare. While the world watches the massive carrier strike groups, the true nature of this war is being fought in the shadows and in the digital ether. This isn't the tanker war of the 1980s. This is a 21st century conflict defined by autonomous systems and cyber disruption. The arsenal of the Strait, drones, mines, and spoofing, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, has deployed what military analysts call a saturation strategy. They aren't trying to outgun the US Navy, they are trying to overwhelm it. 1. The Mosquito Fleet ANAMP, USVs. Iran is utilizing unmanned surface vessels, USVs, essentially suicide drone boats. On April the 5th, the MKD VYOM was struck by one such vessel, causing a massive engine room explosion. These boats are small, low profile, and incredibly difficult for traditional radar to track in the choppy waters of the Strait. 2. The Smart Mine Menace. The mines being cleared by US destroyers today are not the simple contact mines of old. We are seeing reports of smart mines that can be programmed to ignore military warships and only detonate when they detect the specific acoustic signature of a laden oil tanker. This makes clearing the strait a painstakingly slow process. 3. GNSS jamming and ghost tracking. The electronic warfare environment in the strait is currently total. GPS spoofing has become so prevalent that commercial ships have reported their positions as being miles inland, in the middle of the Iranian desert, while they were actually in the shipping lanes. This navigation terror is why many captains simply refuse to move, even before the blockade. The global blame game, China, India, and the neutral giants. The US blockade isn't just a military move, it's a massive geopolitical gamble that is alienating some of Washington's most critical partners. China's strategic dilemma, Beijing, is the primary consumer of the oil that flows through this strait. While the US and Israel focus on degrading Iran's nuclear capabilities, China sees its industrial lifeblood being choked off. President Trump has publicly called on China to help police the strait, but Beijing has remained cold, instead drawing down its massive 1.2 billion barrel crude reserve. The question now, will China send its own naval escorts to defy the US blockade? India's precarious position for New Delhi, the crisis is personal. With 12 seafarers killed or missing, many of them Indian nationals, and energy prices skyrocketing, India is being forced to pivot. We are seeing a massive shift in Indian energy policy, with New Delhi rapidly increasing imports from Russia and Angola to bypass the Gulf entirely. However, the loss of Iranian and Qatari fertilizers is threatening India's upcoming harvest season. The Islamabad failure, why peace remained inches away. The world held its breath this past weekend as delegations from Washington and Tehran met for 20 hours in Islamabad, Pakistan. For a moment, it looked like a 10-point peace plan was possible. According to leaked reports, the US offered a temporary lifting of the blockade, access to billions in frozen Iranian assets. In exchange, Iran was asked to 1. Halt all uranium enrichment and dismantle core facilities. 2. Cease funding for Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. 3. Surrender all high-enriched uranium for international retrieval. Tehran's negotiators, led by Mohammad Bagher Khalibaf, called this US overreach. They claimed Washington moved the goalposts just as a deal was within reach. Vice President J.D. Vance countered, stating the US needs an affirmative commitment that Iran will never possess a nuclear weapon. With the expiration of the temporary ceasefire, the rhetoric has turned lethal once more. Iran's military has warned that if the blockade continues, no port in the region will be safe. Alternative arteries can the world live without the strait? As the strait remains effectively closed, the oil map of the world is being redrawn. Saudi Arabia has pushed its east-west pipeline to Yanbu to its absolute limit, moving 7 million barrels a day toward the Red Sea. The UAE is utilizing its Habshan-Fujairah pipeline to bypass the strait entirely. But these are band-aids. These pipelines cannot handle the 21 million barrels that typically flow through Hormuz. Furthermore, these routes are now vulnerable to Houthi rebels in Yemen, who could extend the conflict into the Red Sea at any moment. Conclusion: 3 paths forward. As we conclude this special report, the situation at the Strait of Hormuz stands at a terrifying crossroads. There are 3 likely scenarios for the coming weeks. Scenario 1: the attrition blockade. The US continues the blockade, banking on the fact that Iran's economy, already reeling, will collapse before a global recession hits. This relies on the Ghost Fleet being successfully dismantled and China remaining on the sidelines. Scenario 2: the flashpoint escalation. A US or Israeli ship is sunk by a mosquito boat or a smart mine. This triggers a massive retaliatory strike on Iranian soil, potentially leading to a full-scale ground invasion or a decapitation strike on the remaining Iranian leadership. Scenario 3: the painful concessions. Under immense pressure from China and the EU, both sides return to Islamabad. This would require the US to drop some of its red lines and Iran to accept intrusive nuclear inspections it has spent decades avoiding. Freedom of navigation is a cornerstone of the modern world. Tonight, that freedom is being held hostage in a 21-mile-wide strip of water. As tankers sit idle and the tolls of war continue to rise, one thing is certain: the global order as we knew it before February 28th is gone. We will continue to bring you live updates as this crisis unfolds.